Hi, Dr. Lou Pulsfer here, and I'm going to show you a way to quickly design a game and then be able to test it to find out what difference your change has made. This is very useful for aspiring game designers because it shows them both how much difference one change can make and how important it is to test the change, to actually see what happens, rather than just think you know what's going to happen. In game design, you have to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can fly, just like anything else. So typically, when people teach game design in colleges, and I have, and I know other people who have, they teach tabletop games before video games because it's much easier to modify a tabletop game or make a tabletop game from scratch than to do the same with a video game. And inevitably, I've found when people make a standalone game, it probably resembles some other game that they like to play. Further, there tends to be a notion in beginners that they're going to make a great game at the first try. And in fact, they probably never will make a great game because there aren't that many great games. And you can also ask yourself, how many people are top class at something when they're just starting out? Very few. So, this method of modifying an existing game in order to learn game design makes a lot of sense. Who am I? I'm a game teacher. I used to teach computer networking a great deal before games teaching came into vogue. I teach audiovisual online courses at courses.pulseforgames.com. I am a tabletop game designer. My most well-known game is Britannia. There's Dragon Rage and many others, and I have some forthcoming. I've written a book, Game Design, How to Create Video and Tabletop Games Start to Finish, published by McFarland in 2012, and you can look me up in Wikipedia. So, we are going to modify a game, which is the crawl stage of game design. And we're going to use my 9 structural subsystems of games to help guide us to modifying a game. The examples I'm going to give you will be from chess, but you can pick whatever game you have that you can modify and then test to see what your modifications have done. So I'm going to go through these 9 structures and make a modification for each one. Only playtesting is going to reveal fully what those changes have done. Some of my examples are untested, so who knows how good they'd be in practice. They're just suggestions of how to modify. So, the fundamental structures of any game, and I tried to do this so it was a video game or a non-video game. If you're designing a game, you need to make some kind of decision in each of these categories. If you make no decision, it's still a decision because there's a default. This helps you conceptualize a game so it's not just nebulous ideas. What typically happens when people make their first game is they have an idea for a story, and it's not really an idea for a game. You need to have mechanics for a game. You don't have to have a story, but you've got to have mechanics. And when you're starting out, you're better off not worrying about the story and worrying about the mechanics. And that's one reason why I picked chess, because there is no story in chess. It's an abstract game. You can have things that people call games that don't fit these 9 structures exactly, although it will mostly, but then you've probably got a toy or a puzzle. You don't really have a game. So, I'm going to take each in turn, and then I want you to take each in turn with your example game and modify it and test it and see what happens. So the first of these structures is theme, atmosphere, story, history, emotion, image, and experience, something related to reality in some way. Now, an atmosphere is the trappings of a subject or topic without the substance. You can have, for example, someone took the Viking game Hnefatafl, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, which is an abstract game, and they added Cthulhu imagery to it, and they had a successful Kickstarter. Well, that Cthulhu imagery was an atmosphere. It made no difference to how the game was played or designed. Then you have something like Battle Chess from the 1980s, which animated the pieces and had them fight. Mostly an atmosphere, although I suspect that because they fought, the stronger piece didn't always win, and so it did make a change to how chess was actually played. Then the second one is player interaction rules and the number of players. An example of a change in chess would be to have the players do rock, paper, scissors whenever there's an attempt to capture a piece. But I think you have to give an advantage to the attacker, or why would anybody bother to attack in effect? So I would give the attacker 1 out of the 3 to start with, and that means the attacker would only fail if the defender won the other 2. Now, there's a less exciting way to put this. If rock, paper, scissors is played properly, there's a 1/2 chance of you winning each go, and so there'd be 1 chance in 4 that the attacker would fail. There are commercial 3- and 4-player chess games, and most of them are unsuccessful because of turtling. In other words, one player sits while the others fight, and they lose pieces, and he doesn't. He is gaining relative to them. There are ways to overcome that, but it's pretty tough. Another of these 9 structures is the objective or victory conditions. Not every game actually has a win or lose, but there's always some kind of objective. In chess, we could say that the first player to reach the opponent's home row with a piece that survives the next opponent move wins. Makes for a very different game, I'm sure. I haven't tried it, but I'm sure it would make for a very different game. Or you could say the first player to take 6 opposing pawns wins. That would be a very different game. Or the first player to take the opposing queen or checkmate the king wins. Data storage is the next one. Where and how is information stored during the game? Well, some commercial chess-like games use a hex grid, or a circular board, concentric circles, or a 3-dimensional board. Those are all changes in the data storage. Sequencing. Chess is a turn-based game. One player takes a turn, the other player takes a turn, and so on. Well, you could try doing real-time or simultaneous movement, something like that. I'm pretty sure simultaneous movement has been done. There's a lot of details to work out. You could have each player move 2 pieces at once, but the very first player, white, in his very first turn only moves 1 piece. Who knows how that would work out? I haven't tried it. The next structure is movement or placement. If there's maneuver in the game or geospatial relationships, how does that happen? Well, in chess we have Bobby Fischer's variant, where you scramble the pieces in the home row, the back row, and they're set up the same for both players. Fischer wanted to do that so that people couldn't rely on centuries of analysis of chess, because it would be different position, and there are a lot of different positions when you do that, different starting positions. Or perhaps you could start with no pieces in the back row, and the players then, as their initial moves, place them one at a time until they fill the rows, and then they commence normal play. And of course you can change the move pattern of one or more pieces, and that's called fantasy chess, and there's thousands of versions of that. Information availability is another structure. What do the players know and not know? In traditional chess, they know everything. Well, there's something that's existed a long time called Kriegspiel chess, where the referee has the main board and each player has a board with only his pieces, and the players move and the referee tells a player when his piece runs into another piece. So you're reducing greatly the amount of information each player has. Or let's take a somewhat simpler version. You make discs that are the chess pieces, and you put them face down. Players set their forces up as they wish, and then they don't reveal the identity of the piece until it's actually moved. They turn it over to show what piece it is. Make for a very different game. Conflict resolution, interaction of game entities is the next structure. Say you roll a die for each piece in a capture attempt and add 1 to the attacker roll. Maybe a d4 for a pawn, d6 for a knight, d8 for a rook, and so on. Or you could just roll a number of dice and add them up. 1 die for a pawn, 2 for a knight or a bishop, 3 for a rook, 4 for a queen. Who would ties go to? The attacker? Would you roll again? You want to give the attacker some advantage or they're not going to attack, which is why I suggest adding 1 to the attacker roll, or perhaps even more when you're using a number of dice. The next structure is economy, the resource acquisition, resource conversion. The only economy we have in chess is when a pawn reaches the opponent's home row and can be changed into another piece. But how about this? Designate 8 squares on the board that are valuable, and then every 10 turns, however many turns, players get 2 points per square occupied, and then they can purchase their captured pieces back and put them back into the game using standard point values. So a queen would be 10 points. You really need playtesting to set the number of squares, the number of points, the number of turns, and so forth. But this would be a very different game. It would be a territorial game. Now there's a possible 10th structure, interface. Even a tabletop game has an interface. How do players receive information and how do they tell the game what to do? That's the interface. Blindfolded chess is an example of a change in the interface. You can't see the pieces. You have to memorize them in your head. Some people are very good at this. Most people would not be. Now I hope that's enough to have shown you what I have in mind. Choose your game, whatever game you like, that you can playtest afterward. Make a change in one of those structures and then see what difference it made. Then make a change in a different structure and see what difference it makes. Sometimes a little change can mean a lot, sometimes not. You can do this for a video game, but there's rarely a way to test it. Testing is the key. It's easy to get ideas for what to change. The question is, what difference does it make? Experienced designers can anticipate what difference it makes, but even they have to test the game, have to have people actually play the game to see how it'll work out. There's no substitute for playing it. No substitute for playing it.